The rain fell hard that November morning, cold, relentless, the kind that seeps through even the thickest coat. At the side entrance of Windsor Castle, a young soldier stood alone. His name was Private James Mitchell, 22 years old. First week on royal duty, his uniform was still stiff, his boots still gleaming despite the weather. He had dreamed of this moment since he was a boy, guarding the king, serving the crown. But right now, all he felt was cold and nervous. The radio on his shoulder crackled, static, then silence. James shifted his weight. His fingers were numb inside his gloves. He checked his watch. 6:47 a.m. The castle was quiet. Most of the staff wouldn't arrive for another hour. Then he heard the steps slow, steady. Coming from inside the castle, James straightened. His heart picked up pace. This entrance was restricted. Only authorized personnel. Only those with clearance. A figure appeared in the dim corridor. Beyond the door, tall, older, wearing a long dark coat and a flat cap pulled low. No escort. No identification visible. The man walked toward the exit like he belonged there, like he'd done it 1,000 times, but James had his orders. No one passes without identification. No exceptions. If you're enjoying this story, make sure to subscribe. We share the most powerful real-life moments you won't believe actually happened. The man reached the door. He looked tired. His face was lined with age, his eyes distant, like his mind was somewhere else entirely. "Good morning," the man said quietly. His voice was calm, almost gentle. James hesitated. Something about the man's presence felt important. But he couldn't place it, Sir James said, his voice firm despite the nerves rising in his chest. "I need to see your identification." The man stopped. He looked at James with an expression that was hard to read. Not angry. Not offended, just surprised. "I'm sorry," the man asked. "Your ID, sir." "I can't let you pass without it." There was a pause. The rain drummed against the stone walls. Somewhere in the distance, a car door closed. The man's hand moved slowly toward his coat pocket, but then he stopped. He seemed to realize something. His shoulders dropped slightly. "I don't have it with me," the man said. James felt his stomach tighten. Protocol was clear. No ID, no entry, no exit either, not from a restricted door. "Then I can't let you leave, sir. Not until we verify who you are." The man stared at him. Not with anger. Not with impatience, but with something else. Something that made James feel like he'd just made a terrible mistake. "You don't know who I am?" the man asked softly. James swallowed hard. The question hung in the air like a weight. His mind raced. Should he know this man? Was this a test? Was he about to fail on his first week? "No, sir," James said. "I don't." The man took a breath. He looked out at the rain, then back at James. "I see," he said quietly, and in that moment, James saw something in the man's eyes. Not anger, not frustration, loneliness. The man reached for his phone. His hands were steady, but there was a heaviness to his movements. Like this moment had reminded him of something he'd tried to forget. "I'll call my security," the man said. "They'll verify." James nodded. His pulse was still racing. Something was wrong. He could feel it. But he didn't know what. The man lifted his phone to his ear. He waited. The line rang once, twice, then behind James. There was a shout, footsteps, running fast. James turned. 3 men in dark suits sprinted toward them from across the courtyard. Their faces were white, panicked. "Step aside," one of them shouted at James. "Step aside now." James moved. Instinct took over. The men reached them, breathless. The lead officer looked at the man in the coat, then at James. His expression said everything. James had just stopped the king. Asterisk, asterisk. The lead security officer was out of breath. His name was Detective Inspector Walsh. 20 years protecting the royal family. He'd never looked this scared. "Your Majesty," Walsh said, his voice tight. "We've been looking everywhere." James felt the blood drain from his face. "Your Majesty." He looked at the man in the coat. Really looked at him this time. The eyes. The shape of his face. The way he stood. King Charles III. Without the uniform. Without the crown. Without the entourage of people who always surrounded him in photographs. Just a man. Trying to take a walk? James couldn't breathe. His chest felt tight. His hands started to shake. "I didn't," he stammered. The king raised a hand. Gentle. Calming. "It's quite all right," King Charles said. His voice was soft. No anger in it. No frustration. Walsh stepped closer to James. His face was red. "Private, what were you thinking?" "Did you not recognize, Inspector?" the king interrupted. Firm now. The young man was doing his job. Walsh stopped. His mouth hung open for a moment. Then he nodded stiffly. "Yes, Your Majesty." "Of course." The king looked at James. Their eyes met. And in that moment, James saw something unexpected. Respect. "What's your name, soldier?" the king asked. James could barely get the words out. "Private James Mitchell, sir." "Your Majesty?" "I mean, how long have you been here, James?" "For days, Your Majesty." The king nodded slowly. He seemed to consider this. The rain continued to fall. The other security officers stood nearby, tense, waiting. "For days," the king repeated. "And already you take your duty seriously." James didn't know what to say. His career flashed before his eyes. Over before it started. Dishonorably discharged for stopping the King of England. But the king wasn't finished. "Do you know why I was walking alone this morning, James?" James shook his head. His throat was dry, because I needed to think. To clear my head. Sometimes the weight of this position. The king paused. He looked up at the castle. "It can be suffocating." All shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the kind of thing the king usually shared, especially not with a junior soldier who'd just detained him. "I told my security I needed space," the king continued. "I slipped away. I thought I could just be someone else for a few minutes." He smiled then, sad, tired. "Wow, but you reminded me of something important, James. I can't just be someone else. Not anymore. Not ever again." The words hung in the cold air. Heavy with meaning, James felt something break inside his chest. Not fear anymore. Something deeper. He'd seen something in this moment that most people never would. The king was lonely, trapped in a life he couldn't escape, surrounded by people, yet somehow still alone. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty," James said quietly. "I was just following protocol." "Never apologize for that," the king said. His voice was stronger now. "You did exactly what you were supposed to do. You saw someone without identification, without clearance, and you stopped them." He stepped closer to James, close enough that James could see the lines around his eyes. The gray in what little hair showed beneath his cap. "Do you know how many people see me every day and only see the crown?" the king asked. "How many people treat me like a symbol instead of a person?" James didn't answer. The question felt too big. "You saw a man," the king said. "Just a man trying to leave through a door. And you treated that man exactly as you would treat anyone else. With respect, with professionalism, but also with the understanding that rules exist for a reason." Walsh was staring at the king with an expression James couldn't quite read. "Surprise, maybe. Or concern, Your Majesty," Walsh said carefully. "We should get you inside." Out of this weather, the king ignored him. He kept his eyes on James. "My mother," he said slowly, "God rest her soul, used to tell me something. She said the mark of a good guard isn't just knowing when to open a door. It's knowing when to keep it closed." James felt tears prick at his eyes. He fought them back. "You kept the door closed today, James, and you were right to do so." The king extended his hand. James looked at it, then at the king's face. This wasn't protocol. This wasn't procedure. This was something else entirely. Slowly, James reached out and shook the king's hand. His grip was firm, warm, despite the cold. "Thank you, Private Mitchell," the king said. Then he turned to Walsh. See that this young man's commanding officer hears about this? Not as a reprimand. As a commendation? Walsh's eyes widened. Your Majesty, he did his job. Better than most. I want that recognized, before Walsh could respond. The king looked back at James one last time. Carry on, soldier. And then he walked back into the castle. Walsh and the other officers following close behind. James stood alone in the rain. His hands were still shaking. But now for a different reason. Asterisk, asterisk, 2 hours later. James sat in a small office inside the castle. His uniform was still damp. His mind was still racing. The door opened. His commanding officer stepped in, Major Richard Pemberton. 48 years old. Career military. A man who'd served in Iraq, Afghanistan, and half a dozen other places James could only imagine. His face was unreadable. James stood at attention. Sir Pemberton closed the door. He didn't sit. He stood there, arms crossed, studying James like he was trying to solve a puzzle. Do you have any idea? Pemberton said slowly. What kind of morning I've had? No, sir. I received a phone call at 7:15 a.m. from the King's private secretary. James felt his stomach drop. I was told, Pemberton continued, that one of my men detained His Majesty at a side entrance. Refused to let him pass without identification. Silence filled the room. I was also told, Pemberton said, his voice softer now, that His Majesty wants you commended. James. Sir Pemberton finally sat down. He gestured for James to do the same. Private Mitchell, he said, in my 26 years of service, I have never heard of anything quite like this. I was just following protocol, sir. I know you were. That's what makes this so. Pemberton paused, searching for the word. Extraordinary. He leaned back in his chair. For the first time, James saw something like pride in the major's eyes. Most soldiers in your position would have recognized the king, or they would have panicked when they didn't, or they would have let him pass because he looked important. I didn't know who he was. Sir, exactly. Pemberton tapped his desk. You saw a man without identification trying to exit a secure area, and you did your job. No fear, no favoritism. Just duty. James didn't know what to say. The king told his secretary something, Pemberton continued. He said you reminded him why the guard exists, not to bow and scrape, but to protect, to uphold standards. No matter who walks through that door, James felt heat rise to his face. You're not in trouble, Private. Far from it. But I need you to understand something, sir. Pemberton leaned forward. His expression turned serious. What happened this morning is going to spread. Word always gets out in a place like this. The other guards will hear. The staff will whisper. By tomorrow, half of London will know that a new recruit stopped the king. James felt a knot form in his stomach. Some of them will think you're a hero. Others will think you're a fool. Most will think you're both. What do you think, sir? Pemberton smiled. Small, genuine. I think you're a good soldier who had an impossible morning and handled it exactly right. He stood. James stood with him. You're dismissed for the day. Go home. Get some rest. In private. Yes, sir. When you come back tomorrow, hold your head high. You earned it. James saluted. Pemberton returned it. As James turned to leave, Pemberton spoke again. One more thing. James stopped. The king asked if you'd be willing to join the permanent detail at Windsor. It's rare for someone with your level of experience, but he specifically requested you. James's heart stopped. Sir, you don't have to answer now. Think about it, but understand what it means. You'd be part of the inner circle. You'd see things most people never see. You'd be responsible for protecting not just a symbol, but a man. The weight of it settled over James like a blanket. I'll think about it, sir. Good. Now go. James left the office. The hallway was quiet. His footsteps echoed on the stone floor. He stepped outside. The rain had stopped. The clouds were breaking apart. Weak sunlight pushed through. His phone buzzed. A text from his mother. How's your first week going, love? James stared at the message. How could he possibly explain? He started typing, then stopped, then started again. "It's been interesting, ma'am. I'll call you tonight." Put his phone away. He walked toward the gate. Behind him, Windsor Castle stood silent, ancient, unmovable. But inside those walls, something had changed. A young guard had seen a king as a man, and a king had seen a guard as more than just a uniform. As James reached the gate, he looked back one last time. High above, in one of the castle windows, a figure stood watching. Tall, wearing a dark coat. The king raised his hand. A small wave. James lifted his own hand in return. Then the figure turned away from the window and disappeared. James walked through the gate. His head was spinning. His heart was full. He didn't know it yet, but this morning would change everything. Not just for him, but for the king too. 3 weeks passed. The story spread exactly as Major Pemberton predicted. First, through the castle staff. Then through the military. Then through the press. "New guard stops king at castle gate," read the headlines. Some articles praised. James called him dedicated, professional, a model soldier. Others mocked him, called him clueless, overzealous, an embarrassment. James tried to ignore all of it. He came to work, did his job, kept his head down, but everything felt different now. The other guards treated him differently. Some with respect, some with jealousy, some with suspicion. "There's the king stopper," one of them muttered as James walked past. James pretended not to hear. He hadn't given Major Pemberton an answer yet about joining the permanent detail. The offer sat in his mind like an unfinished sentence. Part of him wanted it. The honor, the opportunity, the chance to serve at the highest level, but another part of him was terrified. What if he made another mistake? What if next time there was no understanding, no mercy? It was a Tuesday morning when everything changed again. James was stationed at the same side entrance. Same position, same cold rain. He'd been there for an hour when he heard the footsteps. His body tensed. His mind flashed back to 3 weeks ago, but this time was different. This time, the king wasn't alone. King Charles approached with Detective Inspector Walsh beside him, both wearing coats, both walking with purpose. James straightened. "Your Majesty," King stopped. He looked at James with those same tired eyes. "Private Mitchell," he said, "walk with me." It wasn't a request. Walsh gave James a look that said, "Do exactly what he says." James fell into step beside them. His heart hammered in his chest. They walked through the courtyard, past the gardens, toward a quiet corner of the grounds that James had never seen before. "Do you know what today is, James?" the king asked. "Tuesday, Your Majesty?" "It's the anniversary of my mother's passing." James felt the words like a punch. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty," King nodded. 3 years. Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago. They reached a small bench overlooking the gardens. The king sat. He gestured for James to sit beside him. Walsh remained standing a respectful distance away. "I come here every year on this day," the king said. "I sit. I think. I remember." James sat rigid, uncomfortable. This felt too personal, too intimate. "Do you know why I asked you to join me?" The king continued. "No, Your Majesty. 'Cause 3 weeks ago, you did something no one else has done in a very long time. Sir, you treated me like a normal person." The king looked out at the gardens. His hands rested on his knees. There was no crown, no ceremony, just a man carrying the weight of grief. "When my mother died," he said quietly, "everything changed. I became king. Overnight. No preparation. No warning, just responsibility." James listened. He didn't dare speak. Everyone around me changed too. The way they looked at me, the way they spoke to me. Suddenly, I wasn't Charles anymore. I was Your Majesty. The crown, the symbol. The king's voice cracked slightly. I lost my mother. And in a way, I lost myself too. James felt something break inside his chest. The same feeling from 3 weeks ago, but deeper now. That morning when you stopped me, the king said, "You didn't see the crown. You saw a man without identification. A man who needed to follow the rules like everyone else." He turned to James. His eyes were wet. "Do you have any idea how rare that is? How precious?" James shook his head. His throat was too tight to speak. "I've spent 3 years surrounded by people who bow, who agree with everything I say, who treat every word I speak like it's carved in stone." The king looked back at the gardens. "But you stood your ground. You did your duty. And when I told you who I was, you didn't grovel. You didn't panic. You simply acknowledged it and moved on." "I didn't know what else to do, Your Majesty." "Exactly," King smiled. "Sad, but genuine. You were just yourself. That's what I need, James. People around me who are just themselves." Walsh cleared his throat gently, a reminder that time was passing. The king ignored him. "I asked you here today because I want to ask you something. Not as a king, as a person." James turned to face him fully. "Will you accept the position on my permanent detail?" The question hung in the air. "Your Majesty, I'm not sure I'm qualified. You're more qualified than you know. You have something most of the people around me lack." "What's that, sir?" "Honesty, integrity, and the courage to treat everyone the same, regardless of who they are." James felt tears threaten. He blinked them back. "I need people like you, James. People who will tell me the truth, who will do their job without fear or favor, who will remind me when I need it most that beneath all of this," he gestured at himself, at the castle, at everything, "I'm still just a man." The gardens were silent except for the wind in the trees. James thought about his mother. His hometown, the small life he'd left behind to serve. He thought about duty, honor, purpose, and he thought about the man sitting beside him. Not a king, not a symbol, just someone who was lonely, who was grieving, who needed someone to see him for who he really was. "Yes, Your Majesty," James said quietly. "I'll accept." The king's face transformed. Relief, gratitude, something like hope. "Thank you," he said softly. They sat in silence for a moment. 2 men on a bench. One young diddy, one old. One beginning his journey. One still carrying the weight of his. "You should know," the king said, "this won't be easy. People will question why I chose you. They'll say you're too young, too inexperienced. They'll scrutinize everything you do. I understand, Your Majesty. But I believe in you, James, because 3 weeks ago, on the worst morning, you showed me who you really are. And that's someone I can trust." James felt pride swell in his chest. Real pride. The kind that comes from knowing you've done something right. The king stood. James stood with him. "Welcome to the detail, Private Mitchell." He extended his hand. James shook it, firm, respectful. As they walked back toward the castle, James realized something. This wasn't just about protecting a king anymore. It was about protecting a person, and that made all the difference. Asterisk, 6 months. Passed. James's life transformed in ways he never expected. He was no longer just another face in the guard. He was part of the king's inner circle. He saw things most people would never see. He stood in rooms where history was made. But more than that, he saw the person behind the crown. The king who stayed up late reading reports until his eyes hurt. The king who missed his sons when they were away. The king who carried the weight of a nation on his shoulders and never complained. And the king who sometimes just needed someone to talk to. It was a quiet Thursday evening when James was called to the king's private study. He knocked. The king's voice called. James entered. The room was warm. A fire burned in the fireplace. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling. The king sat at his desk. Papers spread before him. his reading glasses perched on his nose. He looked tired. "More tired than usual, James," he said, removing his glasses. "Thank you for coming, of course, Your Majesty. Sit, please." James sat in the chair across from the desk. Something felt different. The air was heavy. "I received some news today," the king said slowly. "Difficult news." James waited. "There's been a credible threat. Against me. Against the family." The words hit James like cold water. "The security team is taking it seriously. They're increasing protocols. Adding personnel. Changing routes." The king looked at the papers on his desk. His hands were steady, but James could see the tension in his jaw. "They want me to cancel my public appearances for the next month. They want me to stay inside. To hide? That might be wise, Your Majesty." The king looked up. His eyes were sharp, defiant. "I won't hide."
Oh.
"Sir, I won't hide," he repeated. "My mother never hid. Even when the threats were real, even when the danger was immediate, she understood something crucial." He stood, walked to the window, looked out at the darkening grounds. "The crown isn't just a symbol of power, James. It's a symbol of presence, of continuity. If I hide every time there's a threat, what message does that send? It sends the message that you're being cautious, Your Majesty, that you value your life. I do value my life, but I value my duty more." James stood. He approached the window carefully. "The team is good, sir. Walsh is good. They'll keep you safe." "I know they will. But I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Anything, Your Majesty." The king turned to face him. His expression was serious, almost vulnerable. "Do you think I'm being foolish? Refusing to hide?" James took a breath. This was the moment. The test. He could say what the king wanted to hear. He could agree, support the decision without question. But that wasn't why the king had chosen him. "I think James said carefully that you're being brave. But yes, sir, I think you're also being a bit foolish." The king's eyebrows raised. "Go on. You have people who love you, who depend on you, your sons, the country. If something happened to you—" James paused, found his courage. "If something happened to you, it wouldn't just be a tragedy. It would be a catastrophe." The king listened, his face unreadable. But James continued, "I also understand why you won't hide. Because you're right. The crown has to be present. It has to be seen. That's part of the responsibility. So what would you do?" the king asked. "If you were in my position," James thought about it. Really thought about it. "I'd find a middle ground. I'd keep some appearances, the most important ones, but I'd let security do their job. I'd trust them. I'd make their lives easier by being smart about it." The king studied him for a long moment. Then he smiled. Small but genuine. "This is why I chose you, James. You don't just tell me what I want to hear. You tell me what I need to hear." He walked back to his desk, sat down, picked up a paper. "It's very well. I'll speak with Walsh. We'll find the middle ground." James felt relief wash over him. "But there's something else I need from you," the king said. "Sir, during this period, I want you close, not just as security, but as someone I can trust, someone who will be honest with me when everyone else is too afraid." "I'm already close, Your Majesty. Closer," the king said firmly. "I want you in the room for meetings. I want you present during briefings. I want you there not just to protect my life, but to remind me why it's worth protecting." James felt the weight of it, the responsibility. "I won't let you down, sir." "I know you won't." The king stood, extended his hand. James shook it. Their grip held for a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you, James, for your honesty, for your service, for seeing me as more than just a crown." "You are more than just a crown, Your Majesty." The king's eyes glistened. "Sometimes I forget that. When the weight gets too heavy, when the responsibility feels too great, I forget that I'm still a person." "Then I'll remind you," James said quietly, "as often as you need." The king nodded, turned away. But not before James saw the emotion on his face. Gratitude, trust, and something that looked like friendship. As James left the study, his mind raced. The threat was real. The danger was immediate. His job was no longer just to stand at a door and check identification. His job was to keep a good man alive, and he would do everything in his power to make sure that happened, because 6 months ago, he'd stopped a king at a castle gate. Now, he would stop anyone who tried to hurt him. Asterisk, asterisk, the threat never materialized. 2 weeks of heightened security. 2 weeks of tension. 2 weeks of James standing closer than ever, watching everything, trusting nothing. And then the intelligence changed. The suspect was apprehended in another country. The immediate danger passed, but something had shifted between. James and the king, during those 2 weeks, a bond had formed. Unspoken but real. The king kept his word. James was present for meetings. He stood in rooms where decisions were made. He heard conversations that would shape the future, but more importantly, he was there during the quiet moments, the moments when the king needed to be reminded that he was human. It was a Sunday morning. Early, the castle was quiet. James was off duty, but he'd come in anyway. Something had pulled him there. He walked through the corridors. His footsteps echoed. He found himself at the same side entrance where everything had started. The place where he'd stopped a king and changed both their lives. Couldn't sleep either? James turned. The king stood in the hallway, dressed casually. No crown, no ceremony. Just a man in comfortable clothes, Your Majesty. I didn't expect, neither did I. The king smiled. But here we are. He walked to the door. Looked out at the early morning light. Do you ever think about that day? He asked. The day we met? All the time, sir. So do I. The king's voice was soft, reflective. Was angry that morning. At the world, at my circumstances, at the weight of it all, he turned to James. I'd slipped away from my security because I needed to feel free. Even if just for a few minutes, I wanted to walk out that door and be nobody. Just a man taking a walk, and I stopped you, James said quietly. Did. And I was frustrated at first, annoyed. Who was this young soldier who didn't know who I was? The king smiled at the memory. But then I realized something. You didn't stop me because you wanted to exercise power. You stopped me because it was your duty. Because the rules exist for a reason. Because everyone, even a king, should be held to the same standard. I was just doing my job, sir. You were. But you were also teaching me something I'd forgotten. What's that, Your Majesty? That respect isn't about bowing. It's about treating people with dignity. All people, regardless of who they are. The king placed a hand on James's shoulder. You've been with me for 6 months now. In that time, you've saved my life more than once, sir. Not from bullets or threats. From myself. From my own isolation. From the loneliness that comes with this position. James felt his throat tighten. You reminded me that beneath this crown, I'm still Charles. Still a father. Still a son who misses his mother. Still a person who needs friendship and honesty, and someone who isn't afraid to tell him when he's being foolish. I'm honored. Your Majesty, the honor is mine, James. They stood in silence for a moment. The sun rose higher. Light spilled through the windows. I want to tell you something, the king said. Something I've never told anyone outside my immediate family. Listened. When my mother died, I wasn't sure I could do this. Be king, carry the weight. Live up to her legacy. His voice cracked slightly. I still wonder sometimes if I'm doing it right. If I'm making the right decisions. If I'm worthy of the trust people place in me. You are, sir. More than you know. How can you be sure? Because I've seen you. Really seen you. I've watched you carry impossible weight with grace. I've watched you make difficult decisions with wisdom. I've watched you care about people even when you're exhausted. James took a breath. Said what he'd been wanting to say for months. You're not just a good king, sir. You're a good person. And that's worth more than any crown. The king's eyes filled with tears. He didn't try to hide them. Thank you, James, for everything. For stopping me that day. For being honest. For reminding me who I am. He extended his hand. James shook it. But this time, it felt different. Not a king and his guard. Two friends. I have something for you, the king said. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small box. James opened it. Inside was a medal. Simple, but beautiful. It's the Royal Victorian Order, the king explained. Given for personal service to the monarch, usually after many years of dedicated service. Your Majesty, I've only been here 6 months, and in those 6 months, you've given me something more valuable than protection. You've given me perspective, purpose, a reminder of why this matters. Took the medal from the box, pinned it to James's chest. Wear this not as a symbol of my authority, but as a reminder of what we both learned. That respect is earned through integrity. That duty is fulfilled through honesty. And that beneath every crown, every uniform, every title, we're all just people trying to do our best. James stood straighter, pride and emotion swelling in his chest. I won't let you down, sir. You already haven't. The king stepped back, looked at James with genuine affection. My mother once told me that the greatest gift a monarch can receive is the truth. Not flattery, not deference, just honest, unvarnished truth. She sounds like she was wise. She was. And she would have liked you very much. They walked together through the corridor, back toward the castle proper. Behind them, the side entrance stood quiet. The place where a young guard had stopped a king, the place where everything had changed. As they rounded the corner, the king paused. One more thing, James, sir. If I ever slip away again, trying to escape for a few minutes of freedom. Yes, Your Majesty. The king smiled, genuine, warm. Stop me. Just like you did that first day. Because that's when I need you most. When I need someone to remind me that even kings have to follow the rules. James smiled back. I will, sir. Every single time. Good. He continued walking. Two men, bound by duty, by respect, by an unexpected friendship that had changed both their lives. The sun filled the corridors with golden light, and somewhere in the castle, a new day was beginning. A day where a young guard stood a little taller, and a king felt a little less alone. Because sometimes the greatest act of service isn't bowing. It's standing firm. It's being honest. It's seeing the person behind the crown and treating them exactly the way they need to be treated. With dignity, with respect, and with the understanding that we're all, in the end, just human. Just doing our best. Just trying to make the right choice. One moment at a time.